Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to part 2 of my two-part series that I call Let's Make 8. This one featuring the October 2018 Simon Says Stamp card kit called Sketched Flowers. So if you missed part 1, be sure to head back to my channel so that you don't miss any of that. So let's go ahead and get started with the card number 5. Card number 5 uses some backgrounds that I made in part 1, so if you missed those, go ahead and head back to part 1 so you can see how I made those. I made those using the Yupo paper and the alcohol inks that came in the kit. So I plan to do a little bit of embossing. I'd never actually done that on Yupo paper before, but I thought I would give it a try. So I am using some Versamark or VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I am prepping my paper with my anti-static embossing buddy. And I'm just going to stamp those right onto that Yupo paper. And then I'm going to coat that with some clear embossing powder. Now you have to keep in mind that this is plastic, so when you go to heat it, you want to make sure that your heat gun is good and hot before you bring it to the paper, because it will warp it. And you don't want to keep your heat on there for too long. So you notice I am swirling it a little bit, pulling it away, swirling and pulling, and just making sure that that gets just melted. That's all I want. I am focused only on that embossing powder melting. And when I'm done, I pull that heat gun away. And then I'm going to trim those out, and I'm going to trim down another panel, and I keep all of my scraps from these Yupo papers because the Yupo paper is fairly pricey, really, and you know, they're pretty, so you can use those on other projects. And so I'm going to take just a piece of Simon Says Stamp heavyweight cardstock, and I'm going to score that at 5.5 inches, making that a top folding A2 size card. And then I'm going to use my Tombow permanent adhesive to, once I've decided what my sentiment's going to be, which I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black ink to stamp that. Now I will grab my Tombow permanent adhesive and I will tape down that panel onto my card base. And then I'm going to use some foam tape for my other pieces, my flowers. And I'm going to start in the middle so that I can have it evenly spaced. Just kind of turning those so that they're not all going the same direction. And then that will finish off card number 5. Very easy, but quite pretty with those backgrounds. Now for card number 6, I wanted to do some watercoloring with that big beautiful bouquet of flowers. So I have it in my stamp platform, and I am inking it up with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I am stamping onto some Strathmore 140-pound watercolor paper. And I'm just going back and forth, making sure that I have good coverage over this image, because this watercolor paper, like most, has some tooth to it. So I am just really doing some stamp CPR there. And I'm going to keep going back and forth because my plan is actually to heat emboss this with some clear embossing powder. My original thought when I did that, when I put the clear embossing powder over it, was that I was going to do some detail coloring. That was the original plan. I end up not doing any detail watercoloring, but the end result I thought ended up being pretty. So once that's covered with that clear embossing powder, I am going to melt that embossing powder with my heat gun, just going over the top of that until it's just melted, and you'll be able to see it happen. That's the beauty of heat embossing. And I'm grabbing my Magello Mission Gold watercolors, and this is where I was like, I think I just want to kind of slap the color down and see what happens. So I have a number 8 Simply Simmons round brush, and I am picking up some water and grabbing the colors that I want, and I am just coloring those images. And obviously not being careful to be in the lines. That is, I think what changed my mind is originally when I was putting down the yellow, I kind of got outside the lines and I thought, all right, let's see where this takes us. And so that's what I did. And then I would go back in with the yellow. I end up making that a little too orange, but it works out in the end. And then I make another flower orange, and then I grab some blues. Now when you are doing this, you do want to be careful that you don't overlap complementary colors too much, because you will end up getting mud, and you don't want that. So I am being a little bit mindful about how much color I put down and how much I let that bleed into the other colors, because I really don't want mud. And then I'm grabbing some purple, which with the yellow would make mud, but I'm careful. And then I decide that blue is just a little too dark, so I've slapped some water down on top of that. And in the process, I ended up getting some splatters. So I thought, all right, well, let's just go with that. So I splattered some more of that blue all over. Now I'm adding a little bit more of a pinkish red to those red roses. And then I'm going to grab some more orange to deepen up the orange flower, and some more yellow to try and bring back some more of that yellow. And then I'll grab some darker green to add a little variation to my leaves. And then I will grab the purple just to deepen up the purple flowers a little bit more as well. And when I'm happy with those, I will heat set that with my heat tool. Keeping in mind that this paper did get a little bit warped, so I will heat set the back as well. That is one way to kind of get rid of the warping. And I'm grabbing some water and kind of softening out some of those harsh edges and adding a little bit more blue to those blue flowers for a little more variation. And once that is dry, I'm going to grab some black and do some black splatters now as well. I'll just ride that splatter train. Now I'm grabbing some of the yellow from the kit, some yellow that is the bright yellow cardstock, and I have scored that at 5.5 inches to make a top folding A2 size card. And now I'm using some score tape, and I'm going to go every 1/4 inch. But I don't need to go all the way across with these simply because you won't see all that, and that would be a waste of that foil. If you didn't know, you can take score tape and you can use your foils this way as well. So every 1/4 inch, as you can see, I added some all along the edges. And now I'm just going to take that foil and rub that along that score tape, and it will adhere to the score tape. It ends up being a really pretty result. And it isn't always perfect, which I kind of like, because then it definitely adds to the handmade element. And I just will go all the way across doing it this way. This stuff is great. I want to explore some more options on how to do it. I want to see, just see what else it can do. And so then to adhere my panel, my watercolor panel, I'm going to use some Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue. And I'm not doing it too liberally, but I am making sure that there's good coverage, and then I will stick that down and stick that underneath something heavy so that it'll make sure that it gets adhered. And for my sentiment, I have just a scrap of Neenah cardstock, and I'm stamping that with some Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And then I will use some foam tape to adhere my sentiment, once I've trimmed that down, to the front of my panel. And that will end up finishing off card number 6. I really like that messy watercolor. I think that turned out really well. And I'm using a sand eraser here for some of the splotches that I got. Card number 7 is going to use those Gina K Design foil cards along with the fancy foils, and I am using my Amazon Basics Amazon laminator to do this. So I've cut down pieces just because I wanted to have different color variations, just to cover the different leaves and the saying. And then I'm running that through my laminator. This laminator was very inexpensive and it works really well. I will have that linked down below if that's something that you're interested in. But the nice thing about these foils is that you don't necessarily have to have a laminator. Now, if you want to use the Gina K cards, or any cards for that matter, then you would have to. But you can there are other ways to use the foils. So I've grabbed that bright yellow cardstock and I scored that at 5.5 inches to make this a top folding A2 size card, and I trimmed down my Gina K foil card. And now I'm going to, like I did in the last card, use some of the creative tape, or the I'm forgetting what it's called now. My score tape, my score tape, and I've just got that lined up on my glass mat, and then I will peel away the backing paper, and then I will take that foil and rub that all over the top. And when that is adhered, I will slowly peel that away. And then to adhere my panel down, I'm just going to use some Tombow tape runner. This is a permanent adhesive. And I'll get that good and lined up. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I do end up grabbing some Autumn Red Nuvo drops. And I'm just going to put a few of those down. This was a super simple card, And once those are down, that will finish off card number 7. So very easy, pretty way to make a card. For my final card in this series, card number 8, I plan to do some more with the alcohol inks and the Yupo paper that came in the kit. I am using all 3 colors, which were the Sunset Orange, Stream, and Sunshine Yellow, but I added one from my stash to it, which is Lettuce, and I will have those linked down below. And I am not going to cover the whole paper. You don't have any idea, or maybe you do, just how much restraint it took not to cover the whole front of that Yupo paper. I wanted to just try and stick to just to that upper third of the cardstock, or the Yupo paper, and I'm using my Copic air adapter along with my air compressor to move those colors around a little bit, and where I see that the Stream and the Sunset Orange kind of have made brown a little bit, I will pick that up with a paper towel, but for the most part I'm just kind of sticking color down and seeing how it reacts. And my goal here is to use the Alcohol Lift ink along with this background, and I'm kind of wanting that to stick just to kind of go along with the big image in the stamp set. So that's why the oranges and the yellows are kind of confined to the middle more or less, and then I've got the greens and the blues kind of more towards the outside. So once I'm happy with how that looks, I will grab some foil. But I'm going to keep, it looks like I'm going to keep going with the color for a little bit here and move that around a little more until I'm happy with how that looks. It's such a fun process. I could literally play around with this stuff all day and just see how the colors react with each other. But I don't have that kind of time, nor do I have that kind of money for all that Yupo paper. So I'm grabbing the foil, the Gina K foils that came in the kit, and I'm going to stick those over the tacky parts. I said this in part 1, that you can let it dry for the most part, but where it's tacky, then you can use those foils and those foils will stick. And I love the way that looks. It just, oh, it's so, so pretty. So I'll just keep working that around. And I end up getting a smudge I don't like, so I think I'm going to try to erase it, but obviously that's not going to work. So believe it or not, the sand eraser works pretty well for taking off parts that you don't care for. So I've got that lined up in my stamp platform, and I'm really trying to clean that stamp really well because I've used it a few times now. I apparently didn't get it totally clean, but that's okay. It works out just fine with my Alcohol Lift ink. So I'll get that covered really nicely, and then I will stamp that down using the stamp platform. And then I'm getting another piece of paper ready because I don't want to waste that because it's all inked up basically, and I will put that inside. I don't end up making anything with this right now, but I now have something that I can do in the future. But that turned out super pretty as well. I just love the 2 different reactions that you can get. So I'll sop up, or like kind of blot that Alcohol Lift ink off of my image, and then I'll start buffering it in, and that's when you really see the magic happen. This Alcohol Lift ink is so cool, and I can't wait to just keep playing with it. So pretty. So I will end up using my sand eraser on a few spots where I don't like that the ink has or I've smudged it. And then I'm going to grab some of that peacock cardstock that came in the kit, and I will fold that down or score that at 5.5 inches to make another top folding A2 size card. I've trimmed down that Yupo paper. I didn't want to trim off the sides. I just trimmed off a little bit off the top and off the bottom so that cardstock would show. I wanted to make sure and keep as much of that alcohol ink on there as possible. And for my sentiment, I've just grabbed some black cardstock from my stash, used my embossing buddy over the top of that so that my embossing powder won't stick to places I don't want it to. I'm inking up my image with the Simon Says Stamp Clear ink, and then covering that with some white embossing powder. And then I will melt that with my heat tool. And then when that is good and ready to go, I will trim it down with a flag banner, or giving it a flag banner and using some foam tape, and that will finish off my card. So yeah, this was fun. So I would love to know, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the last 4 cards in this series, but I would love to know which of these last 4 were your favorite cards. That's probably my favorite part. And hit the like button if you liked this video. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, because I always have lots of stuff going on. And as always, I do appreciate you stopping by and commenting. Have a great day.